Step outside. Immigration enforcement.
That's not my name on that warrant.
Step out now.
Wrong name, wrong address. Step off this porch.
Back up. Federal operation.
He's a citizen. We're not moving.
There's a specific kind of terror that does not need a weapon to announce itself, only a knock on a door at 7 in the morning when a woman is 34 weeks pregnant and eating cereal in her kitchen and thinking about whether the baby has dropped yet, a knock that turns a Tuesday in April into a constitutional crisis on a front porch in West Baltimore. And that terror arrived on April 15, 2025, at the home of Monique Elaine Delacroix, a 31-year-old licensed midwife and the daughter of a man who had delivered more than 3,000 babies in the same neighborhood over 4 decades. When ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations agents Craig Hessler and Paul Brannigan attempted to detain her on the basis of an administrative warrant bearing a different woman's name, a different date of birth, and a different address, and were physically blocked from doing so by 6 members of the new Black Panther Party for Community Defense, who had been providing neighborhood escort patrols since January of that year. And the encounter, captured on Delacroix's Ring doorbell camera, 2 neighbors' phones, and the agent's own body cameras, would result in a federal lawsuit, an $11.4 million settlement paid before Christmas, the suspension of both agents, a Department of Homeland Security internal review of warrant verification protocols, and the particular kind of American reckoning that only happens when a government mistakes a woman for a name on a piece of paper, and the community decides that this time the mistake will cost something. This is a story about the distance between a warrant and a person, between enforcement and terror, and what happens when the people on the porch refuse to move. West Baltimore's Harlem Park neighborhood sits between the corridor of North Avenue and the old B&O railroad tracks, a grid of brick row houses with marble stoops that had been there since before the Great Migration brought the first wave of black families north from the Carolinas and Virginia in the 1920s. By April of 2025, Harlem Park was a neighborhood that national media only visited when something went wrong, and that the people who lived there only left when they had to, because the row houses had porches where grandmothers sat in the evenings, and the corner stores still ran tabs, and the church on Edmondson Avenue still fed 200 people every Sunday regardless of what the city budget said. The morning of April 15th was 52 degrees and overcast, the kind of Baltimore spring morning where the dampness sits on everything without committing to rain, where the brick absorbs the gray light and the stoops are slick and the trees along the sidewalk have that first bright green that looks too fragile to last. Monique Delacroix's row house sat at 1847 Mosher Street, a 3-bedroom that she and her husband Marcus had purchased in 2021 for $87,000, with a first-time homebuyer grant from the city and 14 months of saved paychecks from her midwifery practice. The house had a new roof, a painted front door the color of sunflowers, and a Ring doorbell camera that Marcus had installed in February after a string of package thefts on the block. That camera, which cost $99.99 at Home Depot, would become the most consequential piece of consumer electronics in the history of Baltimore civil rights litigation. Before we get into what happened on that porch, I want to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city and country in the comments right now. And if you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, this is your sign. We cover the cases that cost the government millions because they got it wrong. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single one. Monique Elaine Delacroix was born on November 3, 1993, at Sinai Hospital in Baltimore, delivered by her father, Dr. Jean-Pierre Delacroix, an OB-GYN who had practiced at Sinai for 19 years at that point, and who would go on to deliver babies there for another 22 years before retiring in 2034 with a career total of 3,247 documented deliveries, more than any other physician in the hospital's history. Jean-Pierre Delacroix had come to the United States from Port-au-Prince, Haiti, in 1971 at the age of 14 with his mother and 2 sisters, settled in Brooklyn, learned English in 8 months, graduated valedictorian from Erasmus Hall High School in 1975, earned his undergraduate degree from City College of New York in 1979, and his medical degree from Howard University College of Medicine in 1983. He completed his obstetrics residency at Johns Hopkins in 1987 and chose to practice at Sinai rather than Hopkins because Sinai served the neighborhoods where the women who looked like his mother lived, the women who worked double shifts and took 3 buses to get to their prenatal appointments and deserved a doctor who remembered what it meant to arrive somewhere with nothing and build a life anyway. Monique grew up in that tradition. She attended Baltimore Polytechnic Institute, one of the oldest public high schools in the country. Graduated in 2011 with honors, earned her Bachelor of Science in Nursing from Towson University in 2015, and completed her Certified Nurse Midwife credential through the Georgetown University Nurse Midwifery Program in 2018. By April of 2025, she had been a practicing midwife for 7 years, first at Mercy Medical Center and then in her own home birth practice, Delacroix Midwifery, which she operated out of a small office on Pennsylvania Avenue, and which served primarily Black women in West Baltimore who wanted to deliver their babies with someone who understood their neighborhoods, their fears, and the documented reality that Black maternal mortality rates in Maryland were 3 times higher than white rates. She had attended 312 births. She had lost none. Her practice had a 5-star rating on every review platform that existed and a waiting list that stretched 6 months. She was, at 34 weeks pregnant with her first child, the person the neighborhood called when a baby was coming, and she was standing in her own kitchen at 7:36 a.m. eating Cheerios when the knock came. Craig Hessler had been an ICE enforcement and removal operations agent for 12 years, assigned to the Baltimore field office since 2016. His personnel file, obtained through discovery, contained 9 formal complaints, 3 alleged racial profiling during residential enforcement operations, 2 alleged failure to properly verify warrant targets before initiating detention, 1 alleged that Hessler had entered a home in Dundalk without consent and without a judicial warrant, relying solely on an administrative immigration warrant that does not authorize entry into a private residence, a distinction that would become central to the Delacroix case. The complaint from the Dundalk incident was sustained by an internal review board, but the only consequence was a letter of counseling placed in Hessler's file with no operational restriction. His enforcement statistics from the 24 months preceding the Delacroix incident showed 97 residential enforcement attempts. Of those 97, 22 targeted the wrong individual, meaning the person contacted at the residence was not the person named in the warrant. That is a 23% error rate. Nearly 1 in 4 times, Hessler knocked on a door and confronted someone who had nothing to do with his operation. His partner, Agent Paul Brannigan, was a 4-year veteran who had transferred from the Bureau of Prisons 18 months earlier. Brannigan had no prior complaints in his ICE file, but his Bureau of Prisons record, also obtained through discovery, included 2 use-of-force incidents that had been reviewed and cleared by Internal Affairs. Neither agent was wearing a body camera that was recording at the moment they stepped onto Monique Delacroix's porch, though both cameras were later activated during the encounter. A fact that would feature prominently in the deposition phase, because agency policy required activation before initiating contact with a subject, not after. The Ring doorbell camera at 1847 Mosher Street was a standard Ring Video Doorbell 3, mounted at approximately 48 inches from the porch floor, with a 160-degree horizontal field of view and 1080p resolution. It was set to motion-activated recording with a 5-second pre-roll buffer, meaning it began recording 5 seconds before the motion trigger and continued for as long as motion was detected in its field. The device stored footage to Ring's cloud servers with timestamp and GPS metadata that could not be altered or deleted by the homeowner, making it forensically reliable evidence. At 7:37 a.m., the camera activated. It captured 2 men in dark tactical vests with yellow ice lettering approaching from the sidewalk, ascending the 4 porch steps and knocking on the yellow front door. In addition to the Ring camera, the encounter would be recorded by 2 neighbors. Doreen Whitaker, age 71, who lived at 1849 Mosher Street and had been sweeping her stoop, began recording on her phone when she saw the agents approach. James Odom, age 44, who lived across the street at 1842 Mosher and was loading his work van, began recording from across the street when he heard raised voices. Between the Ring camera, the 2 neighbor recordings, and the agent's body cameras, which were activated at 7:41 a.m., 4 minutes into the encounter. Every second of what happened on that porch existed on video from at least 2 angles, and most of it from 4. Monique Delacroix opened her front door at 7:38 a.m. She was wearing a gray maternity sweatshirt, black leggings, and slippers. She was holding a bowl of cereal in her left hand. She was visibly pregnant, 34 weeks, which on her small frame meant her belly preceded her through every doorway by a noticeable margin. The Ring camera captured everything that followed with unbroken clarity. Agent Hessler, standing on the top step, said, "Ma'am, we're with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. We need you to step outside." Delacroix asked what this was about. Hessler held up a folded piece of paper and said they had a warrant. Delacroix looked at the paper. What she saw, and what the camera captured her seeing because she held the paper up toward the doorbell camera with the text briefly visible, was an administrative removal warrant for a woman named Yolanda Marquez Fuentes. Date of birth, June 11, 1988, with a listed address of 1847 Mosher Street, Apartment B. There was no Apartment B at 1847 Mosher Street. It was a single-family row house. There had never been an Apartment B. The city housing records, which were searchable online through the Baltimore City Department of Housing, showed that 1847 Mosher Street had been a single-family dwelling since its construction in 1923. Delacroix told Hessler that the name on the warrant was not her name, the date of birth was not her date of birth, and there was no Apartment B at her address. The camera captured her pointing at the paper and saying, "That's not my name on that paper." Hessler told her they needed to confirm her identity and asked her again to step outside. Delacroix placed her hand on her belly, a gesture the camera captured clearly, and said, "I'm 8 months pregnant. I'm not going anywhere. I'm an American citizen. My family has lived in this neighborhood for 30 years, and you have the wrong house." Brannigan, standing 1 step below Hessler, spoke into his shoulder radio. The audio, captured by Doreen Whitaker's phone from 10 feet away, was later enhanced and transcribed. He said, "Subject is non-compliant, requesting guidance." Delacroix was not non-compliant. She was a pregnant woman, standing inside her own home, which she owned, declining to step onto her porch to be detained under a warrant bearing someone else's name. She was exercising the precise constitutional right that the Fourth Amendment was written to protect. At 7:41 a.m., 3 minutes after the initial contact, the situation changed. From the east end of Mosher Street, 6 individuals approached on foot. They were wearing black berets, black jackets, and khaki pants. 3 of them carried visible holstered sidearms, which they were licensed to carry under Maryland law. They were members of the new Black Panther Party for Community Defense, Baltimore chapter, which had been conducting neighborhood presence patrols in Harlem Park since January 2025 in response to 3 ICE enforcement operations in the neighborhood that had resulted in the detention of 2 American citizens who were held for a combined 27 hours before being released without charges. The patrol leader was Kwame Osei-Mensah, a 38-year-old Marine Corps veteran who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, and who held a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Morgan State University and a Maryland private security license. Osei-Mensah would later testify that the group's patrol route that morning was routine, and that they arrived at 1847 Mosher Street because Doreen Whitaker, who had been sweeping her stoop, called the community alert number the chapter had distributed on flyers throughout the neighborhood. The Ring camera captured their arrival. 6 people in formation walking up Mosher Street, turning onto the sidewalk in front of 1847, and ascending the porch steps to stand between the agents and the front door. Osei-Mensah spoke first. The Ring camera audio, supplemented by James Odom's phone recording from across the street, captured him saying, "Officers, this woman is a resident of this home. She is visibly pregnant, and she has told you the warrant has the wrong name. You do not have a judicial warrant authorizing entry into this home. You need to step off this porch." Hessler told Osei-Mensah to step back, and that this was a federal enforcement action. Osei Mensah responded that an administrative warrant does not authorize entry into a private residence and cited the Supreme Court's holding in a case that any first-year law student would recognize. He told Hessler that unless he had a judicial warrant signed by a federal magistrate, he had no legal authority to compel Delacroix to leave her home, and that the 6 people standing on the porch intended to remain there until the agents left. One of the Panther members, later identified as Aisha Toura, a 29-year-old paralegal who worked at a legal aid office in downtown Baltimore, was recording the encounter on her phone while simultaneously live streaming to the chapter's social media page. By 7:45 a.m., the live stream had 340 viewers. By 8 a.m., it had over 6,000. The stream captured something the Ring camera could not: the audio of Delacroix, still standing inside her doorway, beginning to cry. Not from fear, she would later testify, but from the compound weight of being 34 weeks pregnant, being confronted by armed federal agents over a warrant with someone else's name on it, and watching 6 strangers in black berets put their bodies between her and the government because the government could not be trusted to read its own paperwork. At 7:48 a.m., Agent Hessler made a radio call to his field supervisor. Doreen Whitaker's phone captured audio of Hessler saying, "We have a situation at the target address. Community group is present. Subject claims warrant is misidentified, requesting supervisor on scene." At 7:53 a.m., ICE Field Supervisor Denise Montoya arrived in a marked vehicle. Montoya approached the porch, examined the warrant, looked at Delacroix, and then looked at the house number. She turned to Hessler and asked whether he had verified the address against the Baltimore housing database before initiating the operation. Hessler did not answer. Montoya asked him again. The body camera, which was now recording, captured Hessler saying they had relied on the address as listed in the warrant. Montoya pulled up the city housing database on her phone, the same publicly available database that Delacroix's attorney would later demonstrate took 45 seconds to search, and confirmed that 1847 Mosher Street had no apartment B and was a single-family home owned by Marcus and Monique Delacroix. Montoya told Hessler and Brannigan to return to their vehicle immediately. She approached Delacroix and said, "Ma'am, I apologize. There has been an error. You are free to go about your day." Osei Mensah told Montoya that Delacroix had never stopped being free, that she was in her own home, and that the apology should be directed to the fact that 2 agents with guns had tried to detain a pregnant woman based on a name that wasn't hers at an address configuration that didn't exist. Montoya did not respond. The agents left at 7:56 a.m. The total duration of the encounter from first knock to departure was 19 minutes. Now I need you to think about something. A pregnant woman, 34 weeks along, standing in her own kitchen eating cereal in her own house that she owns with her own name on the deed, was almost dragged out of her home by federal agents carrying a warrant for a completely different person at an address that does not exist, and the only reason she wasn't detained is because 6 community members showed up and knew the law better than the agents enforcing it. Should agents who fail to verify warrant information before approaching a residence face automatic suspension? Tell me what you think in the comments below. Within 2 hours of the encounter, Aisha Toura's live stream recording had been clipped and reposted across social media platforms. By noon, the primary clip, the moment Osei Mensah cited the Supreme Court decision and told the agents to step off the porch, had 2.1 million views. By the following morning, it had crossed 9 million. CNN, MSNBC, and the Baltimore Sun all ran stories by the evening news cycle. The NAACP Legal Defense Fund issued a statement calling the encounter a textbook example of the dangers of administrative warrant enforcement in communities of color. Delacroix's father, Dr. Jean-Pierre Delacroix, who had not been present during the encounter, gave a statement to the Baltimore Sun that was reprinted in 14 publications. He said, "I came to this country with my mother when I was 14 years old. I learned English, I went to medical school, I delivered 3,000 babies, I paid my taxes for 40 years, and my pregnant daughter, who was born in this city, who has never left this city, who delivers babies in this city just like her father, was treated like a fugitive in her own home. This is not the country that was promised to me, but it is the country I should have expected. Monique Delacroix called attorney Reginald Watts that afternoon. Watts, a partner at Watts, Douglas and Hamer in Baltimore, was a former Department of Justice civil rights attorney who had spent 9 years prosecuting police misconduct cases before transitioning to plaintiff's work in 2019. He had recovered over $55 million in civil rights settlements in 6 years and had never lost a case that went to trial. He took Delacroix's case on a contingency basis and filed suit within 10 days. On April 25, 2025, attorney Reginald Watts filed suit in the United States District Court for the District of Maryland on behalf of Monique Elaine Delacroix. The complaint named Agent Craig Hessler individually, Agent Paul Brannigan individually, Field Supervisor Denise Montoya in her supervisory capacity, and the United States of America through the Department of Homeland Security and Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The legal claims included a Bivens action against Hessler and Brannigan for violation of the Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable seizure and the right to be secure in one's home, a Bivens action for violation of the Fifth Amendment right to equal protection, a Federal Tort Claims Act claim against the United States for negligent training, supervision, and warrant verification procedures, a state law claim for assault and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a separate claim for endangerment of a pregnant individual under Maryland Code, Criminal Law Section 3204, which provides enhanced civil remedies when the target of unlawful physical confrontation is known or should be known to be pregnant. The complaint sought $4.8 million in compensatory damages, broken down as follows: $1.6 million for emotional distress and trauma suffered by Delacroix during the encounter, and the remaining weeks of her pregnancy, during which she was monitored for stress-induced preeclampsia, $900,000 for medical expenses, including high-risk pregnancy monitoring, mandated bed rest for the final 4 weeks of pregnancy, and ongoing maternal mental health treatment, $700,000 for harm to Delacroix's midwifery practice, which lost 11 clients in the 3 weeks following the incident as expectant mothers expressed concern about associating with a practice whose founder had been targeted by federal agents, $400,000 for loss of consortium and impact on the Delacroix family, including the distress suffered by Marcus Delacroix, who was at work during the encounter and saw the live stream on his phone while operating a forklift at the Port of Baltimore, and $1.2 million for the dignitary harm of being confronted with armed federal detention in one's own home while pregnant, a category of damage that Watts argued required its own line item because the intersection of pregnancy, home invasion, and racial misidentification created a unique compound trauma. The complaint also sought $8 million in punitive damages, arguing that the agent's failure to conduct basic warrant verification, including checking a publicly available housing database, demonstrated willful indifference to constitutional rights and that the agency's pattern of tolerance for Hessler's 23% error rate on residential operations constituted institutional deliberate indifference. The discovery phase produced 2,800 pages of documents and 11 depositions over 5 months. Agent Hessler's deposition, taken on July 14, 2025, by attorney Watts over 5 hours, produced the following exchange that would be cited in every subsequent filing. Watts asked, "Agent Hessler, before you approached the residence at 1847 Mosher Street on the morning of April 15th, did you verify that the address on the administrative warrant matched an actual residential unit at that location?" Hessler answered, "The address was listed on the warrant." Watts asked, "That wasn't my question. Did you independently verify that an apartment B existed at 1847 Mosher Street?" Hessler answered, "No." Watts asked, "Are you aware that the Baltimore City Department of Housing maintains a publicly accessible database of all residential addresses and unit configurations in the city?" Hessler answered, "I wasn't aware of that specific database." Watts asked, "If I told you that database is accessible from any phone with an internet connection and that searching an address takes approximately 45 seconds, would that surprise you?" Hessler's attorney objected to the characterization. Watts withdrew and rephrased, "Did you take any steps to verify the physical address configuration before approaching?" Hessler answered, "No." Watts asked, "When you arrived at 1847 Mosher Street, did you observe that it was a single-family row house with one front door and no indication of multiple units?" Hessler answered, "Yes." Watts asked, Did that observation cause you to question whether an apartment B existed? Hessler answered, sometimes units are in the rear of a property. Watts asked, did you walk to the rear of the property to check? Hessler answered, no. Watts asked, when Ms. Delacroix opened her door and you could see that she was visibly pregnant, did that change your approach in any way? Hessler answered, I followed standard contact protocol. Watts asked, does standard contact protocol have any provision for encounters with visibly pregnant individuals? Hessler paused. He answered, I'd have to check the manual. Watts asked, you've been an agent for 12 years and you don't know whether your own protocol addresses pregnant subjects? Hessler answered, it's a detailed manual. Watts asked, when Ms. Delacroix told you her name was not Yolanda Marquez Fuentes, that the date of birth on the warrant was not her date of birth, and that no apartment B existed at her address, how many of those 3 facts did you verify before asking her a second time to step outside? Hessler answered, none. Watts asked, so you had 3 separate pieces of information suggesting you were at the wrong address with the wrong person, and you verified none of them? Hessler answered, the warrant listed the address. Watts asked, Agent Hessler, do warrants ever contain errors? Hessler answered, it's possible. Watts asked, in your 12 years as an agent, have you ever served a warrant that contained an address error? Hessler answered, yes. Watts asked, how many times? Hessler's attorney objected and instructed him not to answer. Watts noted the objection and moved on. He asked, at what point during the encounter did you activate your body camera? Hessler answered, when the community members arrived. Watts asked, agency policy requires body camera activation before initiating contact with the subject, correct? Hessler answered, yes. Watts asked, why wasn't your camera activated before you knocked on the door? Hessler answered, it was an oversight. Watts asked, Agent Brannigan's camera also wasn't activated until the community members arrived. 2 agents, same oversight, same timing. Is that a coincidence? Hessler did not answer. Agent Brannigan's deposition was taken 3 days later and lasted 3 hours. The most damaging exchange came near the end. Watts asked, Agent Brannigan, when you were standing on the porch and Ms. Delacroix showed the warrant to the doorbell camera and said the name was not hers, what did you think? Brannigan answered, I thought there might be a discrepancy. Watts asked, a discrepancy? The woman in front of you said her name was not the name on the warrant. Her date of birth was not the date of birth on the warrant, and the apartment number on the warrant didn't exist. You thought there might be a discrepancy? Brannigan answered, yes. Watts asked, did you say anything to Agent Hessler about that discrepancy? Brannigan answered, I deferred to the lead agent. Watts asked, you deferred. A pregnant woman, in her own home. A warrant with 3 factual errors, and you deferred? Brannigan answered, yes, sir. Watts asked, when the community members arrived and their leader cited constitutional law regarding administrative warrants and private residences, were you familiar with that legal principle? Brannigan answered, generally, yes. Watts asked, so you knew that an administrative warrant does not authorize entry into a private home? Brannigan answered, yes, I was aware of that. Watts asked, and yet you stood on that porch for 10 minutes before your supervisor arrived without once informing Agent Hessler that you lacked legal authority to compel Miss Delacroix to leave her home? Brannigan answered, Agent Hessler was the lead. Watts asked, at what point does following the lead become complicity, Agent Brannigan? Hessler's attorney objected. The question was withdrawn, but it hung in the transcript like a sentence that had already been passed. Monique Delacroix's testimony was given in a sworn declaration on August 5, 2025, 2 weeks before her due date. She stated, I want to explain what it feels like to be 34 weeks pregnant and open your door to 2 armed men who want to take you out of your house. You think about the baby first, not the Constitution, not your rights, not what you know about warrants, the baby. I put my hand on my stomach because I thought if they could see her, if they could see that there was a person inside me who had done nothing and who needed me to stay calm and stay safe, maybe they would stop. They didn't stop. They didn't look at my belly. They didn't look at the name on the warrant. They looked at me and saw what they expected to see, and what they expected to see was someone who didn't belong in her own home. My father came to this country from Haiti when he was 14. He delivered 3,000 babies. He delivered me. And on April 15th, the country he gave his life to sent 2 men to my door who couldn't be bothered to check whether they had the right house. I'm going to have a daughter in a few weeks. She is going to grow up in this house, on this street, in this neighborhood. And I have to figure out how to explain to her that the men with the badges and the guns are supposed to protect her, when all I can think about is the morning they came for me, and the only people who protected me were 6 strangers in black berets who knew the law better than the agents enforcing it. The baby, Zora Elaine Delacroix, was born on August 22, 2025, at Sinai Hospital, delivered by Dr. Jean-Pierre Delacroix, in what he later told the Baltimore Sun was the most important of his 3,248 deliveries. Mother and daughter were healthy. The delivery was uncomplicated. Monique Delacroix would later testify that the first thing she felt when she held her daughter was relief that Zora had not been born in a detention facility, and that the fact that such a thought entered her mind at all was the truest measure of what the agents had taken from her. Settlement negotiations began in October 2025. The government's risk assessment, detailed in an internal memorandum obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request filed by the Baltimore Sun, estimated a plaintiff's verdict probability of 91% at trial, with projected damages between $12 million and $19 million. The assessment specifically noted that the combination of video evidence from 4 angles, the visibly pregnant subject, the wrong name warrant, and the body camera activation delay, created what the government's own attorney described as a catastrophic evidentiary posture. On November 8, 2025, the parties reached a settlement agreement for $11.4 million. The breakdown was as follows: $3.6 million in compensatory damages to Monique Delacroix, $1.2 million allocated to a trust fund for Zora Delacroix, $1.8 million for medical expenses, lost practice revenue, and ongoing treatment costs, and $4.8 million in punitive damages assessed against the agency's operational budget and drawn from the DHS Judgment Fund. The agreement was signed on November 8th, payment was processed on December 2nd, and Monique Delacroix confirmed receipt on December 11th, 2025. Incident to settlement in 8 months, a baby born in between. Everything resolved before the year ended. Agent Craig Hessler was suspended without pay for 120 days effective November 15, 2025, and permanently reassigned from field operations to an administrative processing role. He was not terminated, a decision that Watts publicly called a failure of accountability that ensures the next Craig Hessler is already suiting up for a morning shift somewhere. Agent Paul Brannigan received a 60-day suspension without pay and was required to complete a 40-hour warrant verification and constitutional law training program. He remained in field operations. Neither agent faced criminal charges, though the Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office reviewed the case and issued a public statement noting that the evidentiary threshold for criminal prosecution of federal agents acting under color of authority, while met in principle, presented jurisdictional complexities that precluded state action. Watts called the statement legally accurate and morally bankrupt in a press conference outside the courthouse. The case produced 4 institutional changes. First, the Department of Homeland Security issued Directive 2025-073 on December 18, 2025, requiring all field agents executing administrative warrants at residential addresses to verify address configuration through local housing databases before approaching, and to confirm the target individual's identity through at least 2 independent data points before initiating any detention. Second, ICE's Baltimore field office implemented a mandatory body camera pre-activation protocol requiring supervisory confirmation that cameras were recording before any residential enforcement operation could proceed, with failure to comply treated as an automatic grounds for operational review. Third, the Maryland General Assembly introduced Senate Bill 847 in the 2026 session, sponsored by Senator Damon Jeffries of the 40th District, establishing enhanced civil penalties for federal or state agents who execute warrants at incorrect addresses when publicly available verification tools could have prevented the error, with doubled penalties when the subject of the erroneous enforcement action is pregnant, elderly, or a minor. The bill was co-sponsored by 23 senators. Fourth, the new Black Panther Party for Community Defense's Baltimore chapter reported a 400% increase in membership applications in the 60 days following the incident, and their neighborhood patrol model was adopted by community organizations in 7 other cities by the end of 2025, including chapters in Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, Detroit, Oakland, and Miami. Monique Delacroix used the settlement funds to do 4 things. She expanded Delacroix Midwifery from a one-room office to a full community birth center on Pennsylvania Avenue, a 3,200-square-foot facility with 2 birthing suites, a prenatal wellness room, and a community education space at a cost of $1.4 million. She established the Mosher Street Legal Defense Fund, seeded with $1 million and administered through the ACLU of Maryland, providing free legal representation to individuals who are unlawfully detained during immigration enforcement operations. She endowed the Jean-Pierre Delacroix Scholarship at Howard University College of Medicine, providing $50,000 per year to a medical student from an immigrant family who commits to practicing in an underserved community. And she donated $500,000 to the new Black Panther Party for Community Defense's National Expansion Fund, which Osei Mensah used to develop a standardized constitutional rights training curriculum for community patrol members in all 7 new chapter cities. When asked by a reporter why she had given away so much of the settlement, Delacroix said, "The money came from a mistake the government made at my door. The least I can do is make sure the next woman who answers her door has someone standing on her porch who knows the law and someone in the delivery room who looks like her. That's not charity. That's infrastructure." What began as a Tuesday morning in Harlem Park, Cheerios, a gray sweatshirt, slippers, a pregnant woman in her own kitchen wondering whether the baby had dropped yet, became a 19-minute confrontation captured on 4 cameras, a federal lawsuit, an $11.4 million settlement, a birth center on Pennsylvania Avenue, a scholarship at Howard, a legal defense fund, a Senate bill, and a community defense movement that spread to 7 cities before the year was out. And Kwame Osei Mensah, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and come home to a country that sent armed agents to a pregnant woman's porch over a name that wasn't hers, said the only thing he could think about when he walked up those steps was something his drill instructor told him at Paris Island. You don't protect people by following orders, you protect people by knowing which orders are wrong. But somewhere in West Baltimore, on a block of brick row houses with marble stoops and a church that feeds 200 people every Sunday, a midwife still checks the peephole before she opens her yellow door. And a baby girl named Zora is growing up in a house where the first lesson she will learn is that the knock can come at any time and that the distance between an American citizen and a name on a piece of paper is exactly as far as the agent on the porch is willing to look. $11.4 million, and the door still feels different when it opens. If this story made you feel something, if it made you think about who is protected in this country and who is left standing on their own porch hoping someone shows up, then you understand why this channel exists. We tell the stories that cost the government millions because they couldn't tell the difference between a warrant and a woman. Subscribe, hit the bell, share this with someone who needs to see it. And the next time someone tells you the system is working, ask them about a Tuesday morning on Mosher Street and the 6 people in black berets who knew the law better than the men who came to enforce it.